We relied very heavily then on, the Post-it note concept where you could go to a bulletin board in different color variations, and we could fill up a whole board. I mean, it was potentially we were solving some pretty large problems that might take up, a huge conference room wall, in fact, at times.
Hello, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing great, Miriam. Thank you very much. And how are you?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. So great to have you here.
Well, thank you.
This is one of our episodes that we are recording to let our clients and our audience know more about the ISO and API compliance.
Yes.
So, you've been working for Miro for a few years, but I know you had a very long trajectory at Baker Hughes. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I started with Baker Hughes in 1980, in fact, in Edmonton, Alberta, as a young field engineer servicing the wells around Alberta in the geophysical well logging business. So we would bring our tools to the well site and put them down hole and help the oil companies determine where their oil was, how much oil they had, and what kind of sedimentology they had, different mineral types, that kind of thing.
Now, what are you, a mechanical engineer?
No, I'm an electronics engineering technologist, in fact, which I went to school at Northern Alberta Institute of Technology to get that training and certification. And I was able to apply a lot of that to my job.
Oh, that's great.
But so much from the industry was taught throughout the industry.
Yes. And that happens in really all the industries, right?
Yes.
You learn a lot, but then when you actually go into the business in the company, that's when you learn.
I agree.
Real life. So I know you travel around the world and I guess got into different departments, right?
Yes, that's true. After I had moved many, many times in pursuit of my career, and the oil business that I chose was very, very dynamic. There's lots of opportunities, and it is a global presence. So after I went to, got hired on Edmonton, Alberta in 1980, I went to Houston to go to school. They trained us in Houston. And from there, I went to Alaska.
You fell in love with his.
Well, I did, because I came back 12 years later.
Oh, yeah.
During the interim, I was transferred to Alaska to the offshore Cook Inlet. And I was training as a young engineer at offshore Cook Inlet on the platforms out there. I remember there was 13 of them. We used to take choppers out to them. And then later on, they transferred me to the North Slope of Alaska, where I spent 3 years in the high Arctic, basically.
Wow. Were you married already?
I was.
Holy cow. Did she like it?
You really enjoyed Alaska a lot. It was very challenging.
Yeah.
The work environment in the wintertime up there was quite often
very rough, right?
minus 50 on the temperature gauge, and sometimes the wind chill, or what it felt like, was over minus 100 degrees. So it was very challenging working.
Yes. So tell me, I know you made your way as soon as you could into the, I guess, management systems, quality management, training. Tell me about that.
Well, fortunately, the company I hired was a massive company, very vertically integrated and horizontally integrated. So you could chart a career there and follow many different pathways. So I had spent quite a few years in field operations. And then I went into manufacturing in Houston for about 10 years. And when I went into that part of the business is when I became more exposed to quality systems and things like that. And so that, you have many different opportunities there, depending on the size of your company. So I kind of fell into the quality role, if you will, the reliability role, incident reporting, root cause analysis in the latter half of my career.
I see. Yeah. So I guess you liked it, you enjoyed it, or you felt that maybe it was the right time to settle and...
Yeah, in fact, I had spent many, many years in field operations and many years in manufacturing. And we had some opportunities in the company that were processes were not yet developed. we were required by the super majors and oil companies around the world to do incident reporting and determine root causes of our problems, because problems at the well site were very, very expensive. And at the time I first got in it, we really didn't have a very evolved process. So I helped to, design the process, develop the process, tools, equipment, training, and then deploy that on a worldwide basis.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So then that kind of became maybe your niche, or the area of expertise, I guess.
Yeah, you could say so. I had taken all the field experience that I had.
Oh, that's right. You had all that background, and so now you could actually use it and maybe train others or solve problems that you could understand.
That's correct, which makes a considerable difference. I was basically a subject matter expert in operations, you could say, and a subject matter expert in a lot of manufacturing operations. So I can look at some of these different issues they were facing in operations or manufacturing environment. It would help them understand how to attack and resolve a problem.
Yes. Yeah. I totally understand that part. In my first job, I was already an engineer, but I started in like the lab, working in manufacturing, coming in early, and was really part of the production crew. And you think about it, and it's like you start at the bottom, but then by the time you grow with the company, you're like an expert, and now you have a managerial role, but you understand what happens in the trenches, which makes a big difference.
It does. In fact, boots on the ground,
yes.
Hands involved in the mix. It helps provide, another insight and opportunity to kind of, if you're involved in, let's say continuous improvement or, those kind of processes, to help you really understand what's going on.
Yes, yeah. So about the, I guess, problem solving. Tell me about that. I know you, like you're saying, with your experience and expertise, you were able to help with that. But tell me, how do you evolve to become an expert on that also?
Through experience and time, in fact. Looking back on things, I was fortunate enough in my original degree in electronics engineering technology, is that there were courses that I took that actually taught what they call troubleshooting back then. We'd have to troubleshoot.
Yes, that's right.
Circuit boards, printed circuit boards. A lot of that initial troubleshooting kind of aided me throughout my career, and in fact is kind of a baseline on how you might look at a bigger problem in a larger scale process.
Wow, that's interesting. So did they already train? Because I also remember maybe learning some of that in engineering university, but I don't remember them even telling me much about the 5 whys and all the, different techniques. Did you remember some of that?
None of that was covered.
Yeah.
None of that at all. It wasn't evolved in any kind of process or methodology, really. It was more very specific to, let's say, troubleshooting a specific circuit board, more to, how you might do that from a technology standpoint. However, you can apply that on a broader base, really, to any kind of process, in any kind of organization, in any kind of business.
Yes, that's true. Now that I think about it, I think it was when I was learning or studying for the Certified Quality Engineer, the CQE, and the Certified Quality Manager exams in ASQ, when that whole root cause analysis and the techniques and the different techniques came into place. But I know you were training different groups, right? Tell me more about that. I mean, how did you develop a training class for the entire, I guess, Baker Hughes company?
I was involved on that, heavily involved on that. We were at, when Baker Hughes bought us, we were a number of different, product lines. And we recognized that we had a gap in the product line. So I was part of a team in headquarters working with, global other members around the world. And we helped to basically design and pioneer, implement, deploy, and train a brand new kind of root cause system for the entire organization.
Wow. Was it a specific type of technique, or was like the brainstorming or Taproot?
In fact, there were certain techniques. One of the techniques we used was brainstorming. Another technique that we used was the root cause analysis, the 5 why methodology.
Okay.
And we relied very heavily then on, the Post-it note concept, where you could go to a bulletin board in different color variations, and we could fill up a whole board. I mean, it was potentially we were solving some pretty large problems that might take up, a huge conference room wall, in fact, at times.
Wow.
So
Did you actually remember solving problems? Really? Wow,
Yes.
that is fantastic, actually. So, I mean, did you basically put everything into place or action, right?
Well, yeah.
What you did?
We would have the global operations teams, and we would have quarterly meetings. And at some of these quarterly meetings, we would focus on some global problems we had. It kind of rose to the global quality team or the global, let's say, operations team. And we would have 3 or 4 problems to work on. And there'd be 10 or 12 or 15 of us working on a single root cause in a conference room, working on it for 3 or 4 hours. Or longer.
So you will make this part of your meeting, like you will have a meeting and then you decide, okay, let's tackle a problem.
Yes.
And then everybody was there. Oh, that's very interesting. So I guess you did that frequently, like you said, once a month or once a quarter?
About once a quarter.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that in between the time, you didn't have other teams, other regions, other districts working on problems at a different level. But the problems we were working on were more common across, say, the enterprise.
So you can all put your heads together.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions. Number one, I guess, you guys had a big team.
Yes.
Right? I mean, not every company probably has different layers and so many people as Baker Hughes may have. But of course, probably your problems are also bigger than maybe other companies. I don't know. But how realistic do you think it might be for a smaller company to be able to dedicate time to do this?
Well, when I'm out and about providing my training classes on RCA, for example, that is brought up to me as an instructor oftentimes.
Yeah.
We have these processes to use. We just don't have time to do it. What do we do, Rob? So what I say to them is that you need to develop some thresholds, some definitions, some criteria of what problems you want to handle. In order to do that, you kind of have to collect all your issues and determine which issues rise to the top and try to focus on those.
True. That's a good way to approach it, because you can't be chasing all the problems, right? That's what I say, the same thing when there is management of change.
Correct.
You can't be just applying the concepts to every single change. The same thing with a problem. But that's a good point. If this is a very serious problem, you want to, I guess, approach it with the right techniques so you kill the problem, right?
Exactly.
Yes, I see. One other thing I always say was you could, in production, there's always fires, right? You're fighting fires. And you could either fight fires for 8 hours a day or dedicate some time to look at the root cause of these problems through root cause analysis proper, and then you may not have to fight these fires for such a long time, right?
Yes, if you could have the vision and the strategies and the tactics in place and the planning to dedicate some resource to that, you'd be far ahead of the game in doing so. It takes a bit of effort to do that, however, but you have to have the end vision and the end goal in mind. Now, of course, as you know, if you're certified, say by some different accredited agencies like the ISO or the APIs, there's a requirement to conduct the root cause analysis.
True.
And in those cases, then you do have to have a dedicated team to follow through with that.
Yes, and I'll touch a little bit on that in a minute. But another question I wanted to ask was, aside from how realistic it is to do this, because some companies may not have as big of a team as like the ones you enjoy, how realistic is it to do a 5 whys or a an Ishikawa or chart or a fishbone diagram, 6 amps, 5 amps versus just the brainstorming, because it's easier said than done. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that from my experience, what my recommendations always are and what I teach is that the bigger the problem, the more tools you use, right? Potentially, the more complex the problem, maybe you need more tools. Different angles of looking at the problem might yield different results. I can tell you that if you put 5 people in a room and tell them to do a why chart, you might end up with 5 different answers. It's very possible, because root cause analysis from a why perspective or 5 why perspective is a bit of an art as well. And it takes a lot of experience and skill to not go down dead ends. I call them dead ends, where they lead nowhere. They're true, but they're not the root cause.
Well, that's another great point. It's a simple problem. Hey, we don't need to stay here with the whole 5 amps. We could just solve it through brainstorming, right? But if it's a problem, maybe a little more serious, then yes, definitely using a more formal technique might be better. That makes a lot of sense. And that's how maybe it's companies that don't have a big team and maybe it's a small problem, don't need to go chasing for a big technique. Now, what I do recommend to some of our clients that are, and you touch on this on API, right? When they need to answer nonconformities, I always say, you better use 5 whys. Of course, you better be trained, because otherwise you could be chasing dead ends, like you're saying. But definitely 5 whys, because API, they want you to do a good job. And the best way to do a good job is really do it the right way, do a root cause analysis the right way. What do you think about that? I mean, you've actually helped companies submit their responses to API, right?
Yes, many times. In fact, we have had clients who have had difficulty understanding on how to get to the root cause and how to provide a proper response to API or ISO. And in doing so, they potentially could have some issues with their licensing, for example.
Yeah, right.
So there are certain techniques that you want to provide as evidence that in fact you have a robust root cause program, because they do insist that you do get to the root cause. So you can't be guessing at it, because that's not going to yield a sustainable problem resolution.
Yeah, and with API, you have to. I mean, they have 2 or 3 committees that review your response, right? So,
correct. In fact, there's been times where the clients have submitted responses and they've been absolutely rejected by API.
Right.
And so we have to come in and help in those cases. And on some of those cases, I can specifically recall there were questions of how do we actually do this root cause? How do we get to the problem? So we kind of guide them on that. And some of the investigations, if you will, getting to the root cause required multi-use of multi-tools to really get there. And, brainstorming as well.
Yeah.
And timelines and just different kind of tools.
So when you say, you mentioned this earlier, when you say using multiple tools, do you actually mean in a single problem? I might be using brainstorming, 5 whys, Ishikawa diagram, or, all of those, all of the above?
Absolutely, because the learning that we do here at Moreau, the teachings that we provide, spends quite a bit of time on really defining the problem. Tools about how to gather data, things like that, so that you have a good baseline. And once you have a good baseline, a lot of times you're asking, what is involved. You should ask what is involved before you ask why the problem occurred. Because if you don't have the baseline foundation of the information, you can be easily led astray and go down the wrong path.
That is a very good point. Now let's get to some of our current, events we've seen lately. Unfortunately, and nothing to be happy about, some of these near misses and some of these disasters in aviation, for example. But I know that I mean, even 15 years ago when the Macondo explosion happened, that was like a huge wake-up call. And I remember seeing lots of different, what seemed to be people trying to find the root cause of the problem. Same thing in any type of accidents. What do you think? Do you really think those people are using the right techniques or applying the proper root cause analysis to those problems or the problem solving?
Well, I do know, being from the oil business, I do know there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of investigations on the BP Macondo incident because it was so, carried fatalities and it was a major global disaster. I honestly was not personally involved in any of those investigations, as any of the teams involving that, because that wasn't really something I was involved with. I do believe that they did use a YY technique, so I have seen some of the analysis that were public and posted.
Yes.
And, there were multiple contributing factors. Not potentially, you could call a single root cause of failure of a management system, if you will. Mm-hmm. But they identified quite a few things, at least a half a dozen things that were not really, let's say, correct. Mm-hmm. So when we teach the course here at Moreau, we teach, a single root cause, but there could be multiple contributing factors. True. So you have to look at the full scope of any kind of a failure. And then, something like that wasn't a very simple thing to evaluate because there's so many things involved. Mm-hmm. So many things can go wrong. So then you have a massive analysis as opposed to maybe a smaller event, like a process in a manufacturing plant tends to be a lot tighter with a lot less input. So the more inputs you have, the more complex the analysis gets.
True. That makes a lot of sense, but we hope that people are utilizing those techniques and we hope that they are doing the right root cause analysis and applying the proper corrective actions so that these problems don't happen again, right? But sometimes we see them again, but hopefully, I always say, new problems, not the same problem. If we have the same problem, it means we never found the right root cause, right?
Very true. And I do see recurring problems out there.
Yeah.
So unless you do an investigation and determine, what went wrong, why are we having a recurring problem? It could be an analysis of your process techniques, in fact, a root cause and a root cause.
Yeah, right. Well, this is wonderful, Robert. So we are very happy to have you here and, happy that you help teach the root cause analysis, problem solving, fundamentals, and advanced courses because we do need it. The industry needs it. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.